So let me try for a moment to talk about Hunter Lovins, because she's going to lay out for us really a big picture, I believe, of the regenerative economy and the challenge that we're facing and some of the solutions that we need going forward. We couldn't have, honestly, a better person. Hunter is a full member of Club of Rome. She's been working with the OECD nations to try to transition us away from this GDP kind of economy toward a well-being economy. Different measures of what it means for us to be successful and for us to be creating abundance in society across a variety of different forms of capital. Hunter is also the president and founder of Natural Capitalism Solutions. She's author of probably now 15 books, am I right?
Or 16,
Yeah.
I've lost track.
Well, I know you just turned in Finer Future to the publisher. We're all really excited about that. So 16 books, amazing insights on everything from electric vehicles to just in general economic trends in this world and what we're trying to do to create a finer future. So I'd like to pass it over to Hunter.
Beth, thank you. And thanks so much to all of you for showing up. This is going to be a great deal more fun than I thought it was going to be, because we're a small enough group that we can actually have a conversation. So let's do that. If I say something and you think it's wrong, please say so. You may well be right. Get this little puppy to work. The more powerful they make these little machines, the harder they are to get them to behave themselves.
There you go.
Regenerative, right? What does that mean? We're all using it, and this term is coming up, so I Googled it. When you're trying to figure out what something means, that's not a bad place to start. And what you get first and foremost for a long while is regenerative medicine, and then regenerative braking cars. Regenerative marketing. I kid you not, Sloan has a whole article on regenerative marketing and collaborative exchange are two of the many tactics offering businesses pathways to sustainability. I first came across it with Bucky. It permeates Bucky's work. Bob Rodale also used it back in the 80s. Bucky was using it back in the 30s and 40s and 50s and on. Bob was concerned that organic was insufficient for what it was we were talking about, so he said he preferred regenerative agriculture, and in fact the Rodale Institute is now trying to get the organic standard modified to be about regenerative agriculture, which he defined as improving the resources it uses rather than destroying or depleting them. Again, a holistic system, innovation, and a whole array of outcomes. Vandana Shiva picked it up, again talking about outcomes, that it's answers to this whole set of crises. We used it in natural capitalism. We were trying to build an arc of transition. How do you start where you are today and then move toward where you want to be? And where you wanted to be were managing all institutions, organizations to be regenerative of human and natural capital, all forms of capital, but particularly the two that we're losing. You can proliferate forms of capital. And the permaculture boys are fond of 8 forms. When we built the laser tool, Local Action for Sustainable Economic Renewal, we counted 9. Basically, most of the others are variants of human and natural. And most of the ones that people count now are variants of human. So I just used the 4 forms. Manufactured, financial, money and stuff, human and natural. But we need, if we are practicing good capitalism, we ought to be enhancing all of the forms of capital. The folk at Regenesis have been working on this in the built environment for a very long time and have a great book out on how to do that. There are a whole series of organizations that have been in the regenerative space for a long time. with the one exception of change finance that just got invented this last year.
But they're all here, by the way.
They are all in this
They're
room,
all
which
here.
is pretty cool,
It's
eh?
pretty great.
You can get some fairly goofy explanations of what this stuff is. Process-oriented systems theory. That's at least 3 words in there that nobody cares to define. Regenerative design is part of sustainable living, but it's not the same thing as sustainability implies something that endures without degrading, doesn't regenerate itself. So they've just now defined it by itself. Makes no waste. What? Now we have a perpetual motion machine. Oh, and it uses biomimicry. Cool. Dan Wall came out with a pretty nice book on regenerative cultures. So now we're moving into anthropology. These are the permaculture boys. It's nested, which is good. This draws, of course, from Ecological Economics, which pointed out a long time ago that the economy is this little subset inside of society, which is inside of the biosphere. And their latest is, they start with personal development, then expand out. These principles are excellent, they say. Good. Part of the problem with this field is we've all become a bucket of crabs. As soon as anybody starts to get elevation, the rest claw them all down. And if we keep doing this, the concept of regenerativeness will just be the latest in a whole series of fancy words with too many syllables that then gets supplanted by something else. So clearly one of the things that we all, as practitioners of this, need to get a little better at is taking ourselves out of being the most important entity and recognize that we are all in service to something greater than us because, as Beth pointed out, we're in trouble. Holistic, we're losing the concept of a whole. Sylvia pointed out that what we do in the next 10 years matters more than what humanity does in the next 10,000, because we really are up against it. You guys know all of this, the planetary boundaries. And as Kate Rayworth, the brilliant writer of Donut Economics, pointed out, we're failing to meet the human minimums. At the same time, we're exceeding the planetary boundaries. Just a couple of stories. The projections are now the Middle East will be uninhabitable by 2040. Where will they go? This is the Dadaab refugee camp. There are now 65 million people on the move. And again, where are they going to go?
They're not going to die in a place, I'll tell you that.
That's right.
Well, they will. They will die en route. They will die where they're getting to. So we now have slavery camps in Libya. And the spread of populism across Europe in reaction to this flood of refugees. And this is only going to get worse.
Yep.
We have some other problems too. We didn't really feel this, but the people in Hawaii felt it acutely. Like you have 30 minutes until you die. Until they said, well, no, it was a mistake. This is another one of these. You're not going to survive. There used to be an old poster of, all the things you do in event of a nuclear attack. And it said in the end, bend over, put your head between your knees, kiss your ass goodbye because you're gone. And you don't want to survive.
Under your desk.
Yes.
This is now the world that we inhabit. This is, I think, the ultimate example of degenerative. We're in the muck. And what we need is a ladder up out of the muck. Everything every one of us is doing is a rung on that ladder or a rail on that ladder. So we argue about, well, I don't like sustainability. It ought to be regenerative. Sustainability is just less bad. No, it's not. It's foundational to the ladder. You take away any of the rungs, the ladder slips deeper into the muck. You could say sustainability is getting our nose above water. Now we can go on, we can breathe. But what we need is to begin building the higher rungs of this ladder. And again, as Carol talks a lot about essence, the rungs, the rails are part of the essence of this ladder that is going to lift us up. Every bit of it is important. So when somebody says, well, I'm just working on my own spirituality, cool. I'm working on communities. Excellent. I'm working on food. I'm working on early childhood education. All of this is part of this ladder up out of the mud. Thomas Berry said we're in trouble because we don't have a story. The old story told us who we were, what our job was, what our place in the universe was. It's broken. We all know it's broken. It's worth looking, though, at what that story was, how we got here, and what it means for us. It was invented by 36 men, not too many more than are in this room, although they were all men. In 1947, they gathered at a hotel outside Montreux, Switzerland. 1947, Europe's in ruins. Ludwig von Mises was appalled at what National Socialism had done to trash Europe. Friedrich Hayek was scared to death of the rise in the East of Soviet collectivism. And Milton Friedman believed that the individual is the only legitimate economic actor. They argued for 10 days. And this is something we might want to think about trying, pulling together some of the best minds and actually spending 10 days on this stuff. We spend an hour a day, an afternoon, an evening. We have never pulled ourselves together and really said, what are our core principles? What do we agree on? They agreed personal freedom is paramount, governments are bad, markets are perfect, and individual freedom is not to be fettered in any way. You can't get in the way of the individual expressing his freedom in this perfect market. That is the core, the foundation of the world we live in today. And they were enormously successful. They founded the Pelerin Society. They took over the Chicago School of Economics. If you've had an economics class, this stuff is in your head. They got their members as advisors to every head of state on the planet, 3 of them as heads of state, many of them as central bankers. In 1971, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce asked Lewis Powell, who went on to become Supreme Court Justice, to lay out a strategy of how business could re-legitimize itself in the wake of the 60s. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, business was hurting. Powell laid out 26 targets. It's worth going on the web, downloading the Powell Memorandum and reading it. It is chilling to recognize the extent to which the world we live in today came from this document. He took these core principles of neoliberalism and said how to achieve them. Businesses, chambers of commerce, business roundtables, campuses, get faculty, speakers bureaus, graduate schools of business, the press, advertisements, the political arena, particularly at the state and local level, courts, stockholders, take an aggressive attitude, raise sufficient money, delegitimize the old ideology. You know, think about it. In 1947, people like government. It's just won the Second World War. It's ended the Depression. People are doing pretty well with big government. They have delegitimized government. Indeed, the whole concept of governance. I was with somebody last night who said, why don't the conservatives like marijuana? It's raising lots of money for government. I said, they don't want government. They don't want government to have money. They don't want government. And they're doing a pretty fair job of it. In the wake of the Powell Memorandum, a bunch of outfits, Olin, Coors, Scaife, Bradley, the Koch brothers, each pledged something like $5 million apiece for each of 5 years to create and endow Heritage, ALEC, Hudson, Cato, American Enterprise, this whole suite of organizations. They organized. What a concept. And they endowed these things. So when Mr. Trump walked into the Oval Office, deer in the headlights, oh my God, I just won. He was handed a playbook written by the Heritage Foundation. Here's what you do, here's who you appoint, here's your agenda. And they continue. Heritage continues to hand the Trump administration what to do. If any of us were elected, imagine that, you've just been elected president, what do you do? We'd be like Mr. Trump. Oh shit.
No.
No way.
What do you do? Who do you appoint? How would you know? We are not organized. So regenerative organizations, I think it would be a good idea. 9 years after the Powell Memorandum, Reagan was elected in this country, Thatcher in the UK, and they won. This ideology became the dominant global economic ideology. Up until 1980, all classes of people were coming up together. After 1980, only the 1%. Is this an accident? No. This is intended. You talk about outcomes. This was an intended outcome. They won. So 2 years ago, this is the Oxfam Credit Suisse number. This is last year. 8 men have as much wealth as the 3.5 billion poorest people on the planet. You okay with that?
No. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with you.
It sucks.
A few years ago, some applied mathematicians looked at collapse through human history. They found it's actually fairly common. When it happens, it lasts for hundreds to thousands of years. They found that it happens when one or both of two things obtain. You overrun your resource base, or you have high levels of inequality.
How about both?
Hello! And they said, under conditions closely reflecting the reality of the world today, we find that collapse is very difficult to avoid. So is it the end? No. Mandela said, poverty's not an accident. We made it. The good news is we can unmake it. In 2012, a group of us were asked by the King of Bhutan, this is the Prime Minister of Bhutan, to take the Bhutanese concept of gross national happiness and make it the basis of international development. So folk like Ashok Khosla, who runs Development Alternatives in India, Bob Costanza, who Beth mentioned, founder of Solutions Journal, also of Ecological Economics, Jacqueline McGlade, who was then chief scientist at UN Environment, Ida Kubashevsky that Beth mentioned, John Fullerton. About 40 of us trekked off to Bhutan to try to wrestle with this concept of happiness. Maybe happiness is a better organizing principle. One of the first things that we started to get into was this question of story. Who are we as human beings? The neoliberal story is that we are greedy bastards, but that's okay because in a perfect market, me against you will somehow aggregate to the greater good. It turns out it's not true. Dr. Paul Lawrence at Harvard, Dr. Michael Pearson at Fordham have shown that you look at the evolutionary biology, go back to the DNA. We know this because we have the DNA, we have the archaeology. Apparently, when we came down out of the trees in Africa, naked, our claws aren't worth much, our teeth are pretty inadequate, we're not as fast as a lion. We survived, and you are here today because you are the descendant of those who survived. They survived, and apparently this band of humans was down to fewer than 180,000 discrete individuals, about the same as the now endangered gorillas. They survived because they not only had a drive to acquire and defend, what the neoliberal says is what makes us human. The evolutionary biologists say that's what makes you an animal. They bonded. They cared more for the good of the whole than any one of them cared for him or herself. And they had a drive to comprehend. They told story. They created myth. They built meaning. This, they say, is what makes us human. This drive to bond, and the drive to comprehend is what distinguishes us from the rest of animals. Yeah, we have a drive to acquire and defend it, but the bonding and the comprehending is what makes us human. So if this was Mr. Powell with his memorandum, a group of us said, what if we wrote the Meadows Memorandum, named after Daniel Meadows, the gentle, humble Vermont sheep farmer who was also the lead author on Limits to Growth and a few other great books. This is the beginnings of a new story, that true freedom and success depend on a world where we all prosper and flourish, that institutions, organizations serve us best when they recognize our individual dignity and enhance our interconnectedness, and that to thrive, business and society must pivot toward a new purpose, shared well-being on a healthy planet. Hold that last thought, shared well-being on a healthy planet. I would argue this is the new story that we need to start embedding in this concept of what is regenerative. So what's our theory of change? How does change happen? We took a look at the Powell Memorandum at the targets that he set. We boiled them down to 10. So we're now setting out to build working groups to look at how do you transform each of these 10 areas. We is now a group called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. This grew out of the work in Bhutan, out of the work that Pearson was doing, out of humanistic management. There are now about 35 organizations that have joined in, international organizations that have joined in to create the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. We all. I love the word regenerative, and it has too damn many syllables. Bucky put it pretty simply, how do we make the world work for everybody? He also said you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. You build a new model that works better. So after Bhutan, when I was in Bhutan, the Prime Minister, we were leaving, the Prime Minister came up to me and said, Hunter, your job is to reinvent the global economy. I said, me? So I'm in search of people smarter than me. And in due course, tracked into John Fullerton, who definitely fits that bill. He was 18 years JP Morgan, left as managing director, helped invent their derivatives practice, managed that, private equity commodities from Tokyo to London to Wall Street. In 2012, he wrote this paper, Regenerative Capitalism, in which he sought to lay out some core principles drawn from the way the world works. He points out that here's the world we have today. We, people, the planet, are in service to the economy, which is in service to finance. We are very good at flowing money to the top. What's wrong with this picture? It's wrong way around. Finance is a tool. It brings liquidity, money, to the real economy, which needs to be in service to life. So again, what is the outcome? An economy in service to life. This comes from Bill Reed, the folk at Regenesis. Fullerton and his crew have shifted it around. That where we are now is in the degenerative world. And we are coming up this ramp. I call it a ladder. They have a graph of a ramp. Sustainable is the midpoint. It's getting your nose above water. And that where we ought to be heading to is a system that is regenerative, that's based on holistic thinking. Bill Reed has recently redone this graph around design concepts so that you have regenerative development as the end bubble. Fullerton laid out 8 principles. And he and I argue about these all the time, and he shifts around the language of them, in my humble opinion, making it worse and more syllabic. But the core concepts are pretty good. In right relationship, this is this concept of ecological economics. Holistic wealth. Wealth is more than money. Innovative and adaptive. Initially, this was entrepreneurial, and I like entrepreneurial better. Empowered participation. This is Frankie Moore-Lepay's economic democracy. You have a say over the systems that are affecting you. Edge effect abundance, drawn from biomimicry. robust circulation, the circular economy, seeks balance, harmonizing, honors place and community. So the ecological economists pointed out that you have your little Venn diagram, that it's the nested diagram, that the economy sits inside of society, which sits inside of the biosphere. If you don't have this relationship right, it's going to go wrong. Money, wealth is clearly more than money. Money's useful, but wealth is community. It's having a sense of your place in the community. It's relationship. It's health. Entrepreneurial. I work a lot with the Unreasonable Institute. Donna Morton was an unreasonable fellow. That's where we met. And they are working with young entrepreneurs from around the world with enormous impact. Over 100 million lives impacted. This is the kind of thing that entrepreneurialism can do. Empowered participation. We don't realize if you delegitimize an institution, it dies very quickly. If you don't like something, pull its legitimacy. Edge effect abundance. In nature, the most abundant ecosystems are where two come together, where a river meets the ocean, where a meadow meets the forest. Why? Because of diversity. And this principle of diversity is keenly important. The circular economy. Entrepreneurs have always sailed off over the edge of the supposed flat earth and found that it's not a flat earth, it's round. Circularity is an incredibly important principle. Now, climate change is probably the existential problem, crisis facing us, and yet in nature, carbon is the building block of all of life. So how do we begin to think in circular ways? I like this little company, Lanzatech. They take carbon flue gases from steel or petrochemicals, feed it to bugs. The bugs turn it into plastics, into Jet A. This is their operation in China. This is a steel mill in China. These are the companies that they're working with. They can turn it into tires. They can turn it into the plastic lecterns, turn it into vehicle fuel, jet fuel, which is kind of nice for those of us who fly around on airplanes. Dr. Anders Wiegmann, president of Club of Rome, has this new report out, and apparently he now has a brand new report out. If you implement a circular economy, it generates trillions of dollars of increased economic activity, hundreds of thousands of jobs in every country so far studied, and cuts carbon emissions by about 75%. Balance. Are any of us balanced? How many of you sat in traffic today? You get dressed in clothes you buy for work, drive through traffic in a car you're still paying for in order to get to the job you need to pay for the clothes and the car and the house you leave empty all day so you can afford to live in it. Is this balance? And then place. Wendell Berry said, because we have not made our lives to fit our places, the forests are ruined, the fields eroded, the streams polluted, the mountains overturned. Hope then to belong to your place by your own knowledge of what it is that no other place is, and by your caring for it as you care for no other place. This place that you belong to, though it is not yours, for it was from the beginning and will be to the end. How many of you feel truly place-based? I climb on an airplane this evening and fly to New York. And this is core to what is regenerative, is to again become place-based. Now here's where it's going to get really fun. We think, I would submit, every one of us wakes up every morning and thinks we're losing. The world's dying. We're going to fight the good fight, but we're losing. What happens if we win? We may actually face greater challenges. This is Tony Seba. Tony's a Stanford prof. He says the world will be 100% renewably powered by 2030, inevitably because of some economic fundamentals. 4 things: fall in the cost of solar, fall in the cost of storage, the electric car and the driverless car. So I've been watching to see if I think Tony's right. April. These guys said solar will drop below 2 cents a kilowatt hour in 2017. October, 1.7. The Saudis. People say we're going to be the Saudi Arabia of solar. The Saudis said, thank you, we're going to be the Saudi Arabia of solar. These are the bids just received by Xcel Energy for energy on offer. Wind, 1.8 cents a kilowatt hour. Solar, 2. Wind, solar, and storage, 3 cents. Just running a natural gas plant is 4 to 6 cents. New piece out yesterday. Essentially every European coal company or coal power station is losing money. Germans. Bavaria's got more installed solar than the whole of the damn United States. Have we forgotten how to America? Well, have the Germans forgotten how to China? The Chinese are now installing more solar every year than the Germans have in total.
Wow.
They have already hit their 2020 numbers. California in 2020 will hit its 2030 goals. So they almost set a new goal of 100% renewably powered by 2030, 2040 in the world's 6th largest economy. The reason they didn't, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers said, oh my God, our utility workers would lose their jobs. Yeah, well, they're going to anyway, sorry. And the solar workers, the only place you're going to find jobs. So you have big companies saying, we're going 100% renewable. It's getting to be a who's who. These are all companies pledging to be 100% renewable. A few years ago, when he was Secretary of Energy, Steve Chu said the utilities are in danger of being FedExed like the post office was FedExed. You know it's over when the Kentucky Coal Museum puts solar on its roof because it's cheaper than plugging into the coal-fired grid right there.
That's hilarious.
So little old Boulder, despite being outspent election after election after election, is continuing on the course of municipalization because they say we want to be 100% renewable. Okay, so Tony wins on one. Cars. China just banned or announced it's banning the internal combustion engine. India is as well, France, the UK, Norway. Half the cars sold in Norway now are electrics. China will also next year launch the world's largest carbon market and then probably partner with California on its carbon market. It's making its own electric cars. Little Tesla last summer was valued at more than GM. GM came scrambling back with the bolt. Fitch report. If Elon hits his target of a $35,000 200-mile range car, they said, the oil industry is toast and the utility industry is toast. What company is Tesla? It's not a car company, it's a battery company, or indeed an integrated renewables company. And when the Aliso Canyon well blew out, Elon said, we'll fix it. And in 6 months' time, deployed the capacity for 80 megawatt hours, turned right around and put 100 megawatts into South Australia. Bloomberg said, if this battery stuff is real, this could crash the global credit markets. And when Puerto Rico was wiped out by Maria,
Wow, that's awesome.
we still have American citizens.
Yeah, I know.
Months later, about half of Puerto Rico does not have power. Again, are you okay with that?
No.
No.
So Tesla, Sonnen, LG Chem, bunch of the battery companies, solar integrated energy companies are installing microgrids.
Yep.
Okay, 2 for 2. AEVs. They're on the roads today. So I went to ask Tom Chi. Tom was one of the lead designers on the Google car, did Google glasses, real bright guy. I said, Tom, is it possible that we can have driverless cars within 10 years? Everywhere on the roads. Not, okay, they exist, but predominant. He said, a couple of years' time. Apple's going to start using them to run their people around. Now think about this. If Tony Seba is right, we are looking at the demise in value, probably total demise, of oil, gas, coal, uranium, nuclear, utility, auto industry, the banks that hold paper in them, the pension funds that are invested in them, and the insurance companies that are invested in them within 10 years' time. And we have no earthly idea how to deal with this degree of success. Yes, there are jobs. The clean energy market is the job creator now, growing at 17 times the job creation power of the rest of the economy. Fullerton ran some numbers based on some numbers by Mark Campanelli at Carbon Tracker. Mark said in order to deal with climate change, we have to keep about 80% of the carbon in the ground. So Fullerton took a look at the asset value of those assets that are on the books of companies and countries, sovereign wealth funds. He estimated it's $20 to $30 trillion in assets that are going to have to be written off. Again, if Seba's right, will be written off for fundamental economic reasons. In comparison, the 2008 mortgage collapse was $2.7 trillion of toxic mortgage assets. We're talking an order of magnitude greater economic dislocation coming at us like a freight train, and again, we've no earthly idea how to deal with this.
The market hit 26 today.
And the market hit 26 today.
It did. It went crazy.
Well, one of the things that's happening is divestment. This is Beavis Longstreth. He was SEC commissioner. He said it's entirely plausible, even predictable, that continuing to hold equities in fossil fuel companies will be ruled negligence.
Wow.
What's your money doing right now? How do we fix some of these problems? Let's go back to Bob Rodale and the concept of regenerative. Agriculture is probably the only way we know of to pull enough carbon out of the air to roll climate change backward. Ratan Lal says 2% increase in soil, in the carbon content of the planet's soil, would soak up all of the anthropogenic carbon emissions. Alan Savory, who Trey's worked with a lot and I work with, says this is the only way we're going to solve climate change. Cutting emissions is good. Again, it's part of the ladder, but the real answer is regenerativeness, is grazing animals and using the world's grasslands. Picture taken by John Fullerton. Holistic management, conventional management. This is standing on a bridge in Wyoming, looking north, looking south. Why? Because long roots. So Patagonia is working with Wes Jackson at the Land Institute. This is kerns of wheat, perennial wheat. You don't tear the soil up, plant it anew every year. It just sits there and grows and produces wheat, which Patagonia is going to make into beer. Gabe Brown, going broke, North Dakota corn, soybean, commodity farmer. He said, I'm going broke, I might as well try something else. So he planted cover crops. First he went to no-till, he stopped breaking the soil, then planted cover crops. Then he turned his animals out into the cover crops. He now has a diversity of products, very profitable, can't keep up with demand. He's gone on some of his plots from 1.3% soil organic matter to, I'm now told, over 15%. He's taking carbon out of the air and putting it in the soil. So Savory has said, you want outcomes? Let's create an ecological outcome verification process, EOV, so that you can certify a product as regenerative. you know that it came off a piece of ground where these practices are being used, where year on year you're increasing carbon in the soil, capacity to hold water, biodiversity. Oh, but we can't possibly feed the world this way, can we? Well, actually, UNCTAD says it's the only way we're going to feed the world. Smallholder organic agriculture is what feeds 70 to 80% of the world. It's the only thing that will do it. Here's where we are today, what you might call the tower economy. We're feeding money to the top. We need to reinvent essentially everything. This is the exciting part. We're going to reinvent everything. We're particularly going to reinvent finance. And this is the work that Donna will talk about later. I'm honored to be a part of a new little company, Change Finance, investing in service to life. We're Occupy meets Wall Street. And I expect Donna will show the picture of a group of us, majority women, people of color, standing on the balcony at the New York Stock Exchange, ringing the bell on the 7th of November.
Awesome.
To release an exchange-traded fund that is truly fossil fuel-free. But in this new economy, we need to pull in from the margins, the people who've been left out of the old economy. The fossil era is over. Now the question is, how do we build an economy in service to life? How do we celebrate a real economy? An economy based on the creatives, on the previously dispossessed, the people who 500 years ago would have been burnt at the stake. People like Jane Jacobs, who talked about cities. Cities are the economic engine still today. How do we ensure small-scale manufacturing? Or Vandana, you can't have living economies unless you have localized economies. How do you build economies of place? Iowa City has badged itself as a regenerative city. And you're starting to see cities all around. Herbie Girardet talks about the ecopolis. And in his book, Regenerative Cities, lists a whole set of what cities around the world are doing to do this. We're in that right now. The Alliance Center. This used to be 1900. This was a warehouse. And now it is a center of all of this kind of activity. Or just across the street, Dana Crawford. Yeah, they were going to bulldoze most of Lodo, where we are now, and build the kind of stuff they're building off. Dana said, no, save it. She was instrumental in bringing the ballpark, in bringing life back to lower downtown, and in redoing Union Station as a place for people. While you're here, if you haven't, go into the terminal in Union Station and experience Denver's living room. Dana insists, among other things, that the carpet be real Persian carpets. It's a living room. It's a place for people. And you'll often find Dana sitting in there. Bucky said, we're taking our final exam. We've come to an extraordinary moment when it does not have to be you or me. There is enough for all. We need not operate competitively any longer. If we succeed, it will be because of youth, truth, and love. What do we do? Solve the climate crisis, and I've told you 2 ways to do that. Implement regenerative agriculture, empower entrepreneurs to create the jobs that end poverty, empower communities to create resilience, mobilize the money in service to life, and all the rest will follow. It's really not that hard. Pete Seeger said the key to the future of the world is finding the optimistic stories and letting them be known. Humans have always learned by story. It's who we are. We create meaning. We create story. This is the archetypical story, the hero's journey. And it's worth going back and reading Joseph Campbell, or also there's a brilliant book called Winning the Story Wars by Jonas Sachs. marketing expert who did the story of stuff. And he points out it's key to this hero's journey that we're not the hero. The hero is out there. The hero is the people. We're the helper. We're the enabler. We're the goddess that brings the gift, but we're not the hero. We keep thinking of ourselves as the hero. This is my story. This is my journey. We need to get over ourselves and get better at telling stories. It's only a little planet. It's the only place in all the universe we know of where there is life. And we're the only ones who can take care of it. So thanks very much for being here. I'm even on time.
I know, perfect. Oh my gosh. We still actually have 15 minutes for questions, discussion. Please, let's get some dialogue going. Do you need a microphone? Yes. I mean, we can, I can carry it.
So Hunter, I was with you in Boulder, that group that you put together in Boulder last spring, and I'm here with KGNU Radio. You talked a little bit about, we use the plane, those of us who fly on planes. I have a 22-year-old who every single thing she does, she feels like she's killing the planet. Everything. Every trip she takes, every stir, she's a person with a Nalgene and her own coffee cup. But how do you, right, but you do get on planes and you're spreading the word. So how do you wrestle with your use of resources, the necessity for travel, knowing that you're adding to the harm? And how do you advise younger people who are so tuned into this to not just despair and stay in their house and not touch or do anything?
By getting up in the morning, we are, as Yvonne Chenard said, we're causing some harm to something. The people in India, the Jains, who have somebody go and sweep the way so that they're sure they don't step on a bug, though of course they're decimating microbes with their sweeping action. That is the nature of life. All food is life. We take life every time we eat. To me, the important thing is, am I giving back more than whatever harm it is I may be doing in the process? So I keep in my head a carbon budget, and I query, is this flight worth it? Isabel Nessie, my exec, books all my travel, and we debate, is this a trip I should go on? Is this one worth it? And I ask my students, I teach in New York at Bard MBA, and I ask my students, would you rather that I stayed at home and didn't burn carbon or come here to be with you? I'm going to New York to teach at Fullerton. And I ask students that, should I stay at home? They all say, no! And I think as long as the students say, come, be with us, and as long as I can in my own heart say, I'm within my carbon balance. Brandon runs Colorado Carbon Fund. Beth, you drove up today with a clean energy license plate. All of you who live in Colorado, get your clean energy license plate. That's through the Colorado Carbon Fund. And that's just one thing you can do. By investing in that, you're investing in a process that offsets the carbon that you're emitting. Offsets are only a first step. The question is, it is Beth so ably put, what's the outcome? Are all our actions adding up to more than keeping our nose above water? Are they adding up to a regenerative world? If yes, then I think we're on the right path. And Isabel knows we query this all the time. Are we doing the right thing? Should we be doing something different?
So it's a mindfulness. There's a mindfulness element, there's a math element, and there's availing oneself of opportunities like the license plate to participate in something that's definitely positive.
Yeah, and again, this concept of the ladder, every rung on the ladder is part of the essence of ladder, Carol's concept. I'm not going to say to your kid, no, you should live your life this way. But I will say that if you care about a future